order, April 19th, 2021. Ann, if you would please call the roll.
Grant Foster.
Here.
Keith Furman.
Here.
Rebecca Kimball.
Here.
Eric Sundquist. Randy Udell.
Here.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
Tom Wilson.
Here.
Baltazar de Anda Santana.
Here.
Margaret Bergamini. Badri Lankala.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. We do have a quorum. Joe, if you would then proceed with our standard virtual meetings introduction.
Sure. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. All panelists, that is alders, board members, and staff, have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the body, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Our first item is approval of minutes from our April 5th, 2021 meeting. Assuming all board members have had a chance to review those if they so chose, is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Motion by Alder Kimball. Is there a second? Second by Badri. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving our minutes from the April 5th, 2021 meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that is unanimous. Public comment for items not on the agenda. We did have one registrant, a Jonathan D. Hunter, 1105 East Johnson Street, Madison, Wisconsin, who voted or wishes to support agenda item 45. I think there was a misunderstanding here. I think what this individual meant is item 45 on tomorrow's Common Council agenda, which is transferring parking enforcement duties from the Madison Police Department to Parking Division. And that individual wished to register in support, but not wishing to speak. And are there any other registrants for public comment for items not on the agenda?
There was also Sarah Christopherson at the same address for item.
Okay. And was that registrant wishing to speak?
No.
Okay. And then was it support or opposed?
Oppose.
Okay. So we have one support, one opposed for that item. Are there any disclosures, communications, or recusals from members of the board? Seeing none. Our first item tonight is Legistar 65052, a complete Green Streets presentation, public engagement pre-design, gap analysis methodology, and schedule. So we have Adam Wood here to give our presentation.
Hey, thank you. Hello.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, I'm going to share my screen real quickly. And there we go. Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us here to speak with you about this project. We're really excited to finally get the ball rolling a little bit more on this work. This is a presentation of the Complete Green Streets project and what we are tentatively for the moment calling a coordinated engagement for transportation projects effort. If you recall, we have gone through an effort over the last couple of months to rescope the engagement to a degree to further broaden the reach of what it is that we're asking about to inform additional initiatives and efforts like Vision Zero, work on neighborhood traffic calming policies, and potentially other transportation related decisions in the next few years, primarily focusing on street design and operation. So this is not informing the metro network redesign or anything along those lines. In looking at this coordinated engagement effort, we're really focusing on a big question, which is what should guide the way that we design our streets. So this evening, we're going to give you an update on 3 of these items. The first is the pre-design process. And this is something that was added in when we rescoped this engagement to give us the opportunity to figure out effectively how we can talk further about this really technical matter of street design and operation in a meaningful way and an accessible way, and especially how we can broaden who we engage and focusing on trying to engage with people that haven't historically been very active participants in the topic of street design. We're going to speak a little bit about our approach to the gap analysis, and then I'll wrap up by giving an update on the project timeline. I have with me tonight Annette Miller with Equity by Design, who is a part of our project team, and she's going to speak about the pre-design effort and tell you a little bit more about why we did it, what we did, and what we've learned so far. We will come back to you, and I'll circle back at the end of the project time, end of the presentation with project timeline. We're going to come back to you in May and tell you more about what we learned through that. So this is sort of a preliminary look at it. So Annette, if you are on.
I am. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I've just learned that you got to ask that question or you're talking to yourself. So hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you tonight. So why the pre-design? Obviously, we've all personally or socially have been impacted by the pandemics this past 12 to 14 months. And so what we think we understood about engagement and reaching out to the community before these pandemics and where we find ourselves now is really ultimately why we need pre-design. I'm good at what I do. I have great relationships in this community, in this county. But the reality is I don't know, how people have been impacted. I don't know what people are willing to do and to what extent. And so it's really important, I felt, and we felt as a team, that we need to learn some things before we just go out there and assume business as usual. So that's the main reason for why we want to do this pre-design. The second reason is that this isn't an easy topic. This isn't like, hey, do you want a pool? Or, hey, it's not this, A or B kind of question. It's more technical. It's deeper in terms of how you talk about this. And the other piece is that when we do talk about underserved communities and groups that are hard to reach, these are not topics that they have regular practice in. And so that is another important reason why we need to do pre-design, because we need to hear from a small group of people about an approach, what are ways in which to talk about this, and how can we get engagement, especially in light of these pandemics that we've faced. What are people willing to do, and what do we need to know in order to be prepared for the engagement process? What this project is attempting to do and seeking to do is super important, and so we want to make sure that we have engagement. So those are the main reasons for the pre-design. So with the next slide, just want to talk a little bit about the format of this pre-design, which is really talking to a very small group. In a focus group, we're looking to get 10 to 15 people. And so we're asking them these very targeted questions. So, we put together a informative presentation that really talked about the history and the present and the future of what we're looking to do with this work, and really try to have a conversation and a dialogue about not only the content, but also how they think this information lands and what we should be thinking about in terms of guiding us in how we talk about streets, and especially to lay people, and especially to groups that don't often talk about these issues. And then what do we need to be aware of that we may not understand? And so we put together a follow-up survey to dig a little bit deeper into those questions. Next slide. And so we, like I said, we invited 28 people. 68% opened the invitation. We did not get a response from 9 people. So we basically had a 50% response rate, which is really great for a project like this. And we ended up having 6 attendees in the room. And then as part of the follow-up work, we have 4 one-on-one follow-up sessions that we're doing with some individuals who were not able to make it. So we'll have a pretty strong, informed response with this pre-designed process. We're really excited to know that it's very representative in terms of talking to diverse members of the community. For the folks that were in the room, they were African American or identify as African American or African or Black, and then Latino, Latinx, Hispanic. Even split around gender, even split around language. In terms of age, we had some who were under 30, we had some who were between 31 and 40, and we also had someone who was between 41 and 50, and I was not included in that. And then in terms of background experience, that was also good as well. So we have people who are active. So we had bicyclists, we had people who engage in the community. We had people with sustainability energy background, and we also had people with health and health equity. And so this experience is not unique one-to-one to one person. These were the different types of intersectional skill sets that people brought into the room. So really excited about the talent and the knowledge that showed up at the pre-design. Next slide. In terms of themes that came up, and these are high level, they really were intrigued about the project and wanted to learn more. And that was, of course, by design. Even our tag, Let's Talk Streets, was a way to sort of create curiosity. They felt it was a very informative presentation. They really liked the idea of us centering values and talking about values from a perspective of race and culture. And really thinking about equity as part of the design. They liked the idea and wanted us to consider stipends in order to create engagement. They were concerned about, this notion of squeaky wheel gets the oil. And so they're glad that we're taking the time to really think about how they, as underserved and often not heard groups, are really able to be engaged and brought in and bridged into this topic. And really thought about the idea that instead of from a car perspective, that once the street is built, you get what's left over, that these streets really be designed for people and cars get what's left over. So it was fun to hear some of that humor in the group. To speak that up and to share that. And then they also talked about, creative and innovative ways in which to really think about how to get people into the streets. So they talked about, people being able to pull their chairs up into the streets and creating games. So like I said, really interesting perspectives and viewpoints that have some really good merit. We're getting some more through the survey. Next slide and last slide. As I indicated early on, Equity by Design is making some one-on-one follow-up calls. They've all been booked and they'll be happening this week. We've sent out a follow-up survey to the attendees. Half of them have filled it out, so I'm just trying to wrap up getting the remainder to complete that survey. But I'll also be using that survey to talk to these one-on-ones. So either way, we'll get some good data. And really, all of this pre-designed, both with the focus groups and with the survey and the one-on-one calls, is to really help inform us on what the strategy and the design for engagement should look like for this process. And we plan on bringing that forward to you all in May. And I talked really fast, and if Adam tried to say anything, I didn't leave him any space. So I'm going to pause now and just double check that I didn't miss anything. And because he was part of the pre-design as well. He was there at the focus group. So just wanted to offer a moment for him.
Well, no, thanks, Annette. You covered everything. And I think that this is really important work as we start by talking about complete streets, but we think about all the other ways that street design influences people's lives and how we can learn about those positive and maybe negative impacts that people have, it's really critical to explore ways to have this meaningful level of engagement. And when we talk about complete streets and how we make our decisions, this is really about people, and it's about the human experience, and it's about all the ways that we are out there and moving about and experiencing the built environment. So unless, Annette, you had another follow-up.
No, unless anyone, I'm assuming that we'll get questions at the end. So I'll just wait till then.
Okay. Well, I'll finish up and then we can have questions. And one of the things, again, tying into that human-centered approach to thinking about streets and transportation, we're going to talk just a little bit about our approach to the gap analysis, which is where we are right now on the technical side of the project. We're not engaging in network planning or long-range transportation planning through this project. We're looking at street design, decision-making. And so our approach to gap analysis is not so much a highly complex access or connectivity analysis, but it's more about looking at what do our streets do well and what do they maybe not do so well. And also thinking about who are they serving and what uses are they serving effectively. So some of the things that we're looking at, especially through the lens of complete green streets and Vision Zero and safety and so forth, are pedestrian safety and comfort, bicyclist safety and comfort and connectivity to a degree, as well as just what is the use of roadways and what sort of balance of space is out there and is it appropriate for the contexts. And then also importantly, we want to look at disparities in safety and comfort and access for different community groups to see what is working well and what's not working quite so well. So one of the things that we are looking at is bicyclist safety and comfort. And one of the sort of industry standard or very common practice ways of looking at bicyclist safety and comfort these days is the level of traffic stress analysis methodology. This is a map of data created by the MPO, and they're currently in the process of updating this data. Just a refresher, and for anyone that's not familiar with this, there are 4 classifications of streets and paths that the level of traffic stress model evaluates. You can see the definitions on the left-hand side of the screen, but essentially the lower the number, the lower the stress level or higher the comfort. Higher the number, then higher stress, lower comfort. So on this map, the 2 shades of green indicate the lower stress streets and paths, whereas the orange shades are higher stress. And this really illustrates that there's a spectrum of safety and comfort. You can have streets in this model that are low stress, that are great for 8 and 9-year-olds biking. And then there are some streets that are considered low stress for adults, but they may not be places you'd be comfortable with a child that young biking on their own bike. Looking at the map, looking across Madison, you'll see that the vast majority of streets are one of the 2 shades of green, meaning that they're low stress. However, when you start to dig in and you look at the collector and arterial streets, and you look at the streets that make some really critical connections across barriers, you'll see that there are more of the higher stress streets as a proportion of that network that's out there. So this is something we're going to be looking at using data that the MPO is updating. Illustrating this a slightly different way, these are some examples in Madison of streets of different traffic stress volumes. From the one on the left, that's a path alongside a street over by the zoo. That's going to provide the most amount of separation. And you can sort of see the spectrum as you move over to the right and you end up on higher speed roadways without that sort of level of physical separation. So in terms of looking at it from a gap perspective, one of the things that we would really like your feedback on, and this is a bigger policy question, is what should be our target? Using the level of traffic stress model and looking at what the MPO is updating, there are thresholds in there based on motor vehicle traffic speed and volumes and other factors that are used to define whether a street is level of traffic stress 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. But the big question we have is what should be our target for streets in Madison? As we're looking at this from a complete streets perspective, as we're looking at how we allocate space and how we establish priorities in different streets within the street typology, what should be the target? And you can look at this question in two ways. What should be our target for all streets? Do we want every street in Madison to be suitable for all ages and abilities, for 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 80, 90-year-olds as well? If so, what sort of trade-offs are we willing to make to achieve that? And then, or maybe it's a level of traffic stress 2 becomes our target for all streets. Maybe we treat primary and secondary bikeways in the plan a little bit differently, and we shoot for a higher comfort level, a lower stress level on those. So this is kind of a policy question we would like some input on as we start to go through and perform this analysis. In a similar way, we're going to look at pedestrian safety and comfort, and this is just a snapshot of some of the things that we're going to consider. This is a map of sidewalks and crosswalks and grade-separated crossings in the city currently. And in some ways, you can think of pedestrian access as sort of a binary decision. Either there is a sidewalk or there's not a sidewalk, but there are a lot of nuances to that conversation, especially when we start to think about who uses the pedestrian system and for what purpose. It's a critical element of giving people access to the transit system, but there are a lot of varying degrees of speed and physical ability and so forth within the users of sidewalks and crosswalks and paths. When you have a stroller, when you're using a wheelchair, when you're younger, a walker perhaps, you're traveling at a lower speed and you're more greatly impacted by things like rough pavement or disconnected sidewalk segments. But as we start to think about it, we need to keep in mind that there are different types of facilities for walking that we can consider. So it's not just about where sidewalks are, but we do, again, want to think about the spectrum of users. So when we're considering the use of a sidewalk versus the use of a shared use path, or perhaps some spaces where we have shared spaces, those considerations for the different ages and different abilities of people using them are really important. So when we're talking about, there are some examples of where maybe a street can function as a shared space with people biking and walking and driving, where the speeds are low enough, target of usually 15 miles per hour or below is the actual operating speed, and then really low levels of traffic volumes, preferably below 1,000 vehicles per day, less than 500 to be ideal as well. So it's not as fully established a criteria as the bicycle level of traffic stress, but we're sort of trying to paint a similar picture. So when we're talking about the types of people and that variation of skills and capabilities and levels of comfort, we're hitting kind of a similar level of equity between the modes. The final thing I'll say there is just we also are wanting to consider the disparities in terms of access and safety. We know this is a map of what's called racial dots of where people live, and we know that there is a degree of segregation in terms of where people live in the city, and we can see some correlations with things like freeways and higher speed roadways and so forth. So we want to look at that a little bit further as we continue to go forward. And so this is my last slide. I know we've talked a little longer than expected, but this is a timeline for the project overall. We're completed with this first column, which is the November to February, where we kicked off the project. We had data collection from a technical perspective. One of the pieces that slowed us down a bit was this re-scoping of our engagement process to broaden what we're doing and to further inform various efforts that the city's engaged with. Today, we're presenting you, and back in November, rather, we presented you with the project scope. And today we're into the second bucket of March through May. We're looking at a gap in condition analysis over the next couple of months, like I just explained. We're going through this pre-design effort with the outreach. And then when we come back to you in May, we're going to present to you the what we call a project identity. Annette hinted at it a little bit, but we're going to, through the pre-design, come up with a more tangible, more accessible name for what it is that we're doing when we're talking with the public. and we'll present to you our plan for stage 1 outreach and the findings of the gap and conditions summary. As we go into the summer, it'll be a focus on outreach. It's sort of to be determined. This is what we're doing right now, is figuring out what are the strategies we're going to use, but we will include a website and have a survey and some focus group discussions. We'll come back to you in July with the findings of that and then have a conversation about mode hierarchy and the foundation for decision making. What are the key factors that are going to drive decisions? We'll present with you what we're going to talk about or how we're going to engage in stage 2 for outreach, and then get into that into July and October. You can see on here, and I won't necessarily read through everything else in detail, but you can see the process we've outlined with several touch points to come back to you over every few months. Once we get into the fall and moving into winter and spring, things will stretch out a little bit as we get into the whole process of developing a document and going through public review, but we'll come back to you a few times during that to present to you where things are, feedback we're hearing, and ultimately in March present to you the final public review draft. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. Hopefully this was informative or answered a few questions. I'd be happy to respond to any questions you have. And again, would really be interested in any discussion that you might have as far as policy direction for what should our threshold be when we're looking at bicycle level of traffic stress on, again, all streets, period, versus streets that are part of the primary and secondary bikeway plan.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Adam. We do have a registrant for public comment. Ann Kovich, 2605 Golden Gate Way, Madison, in support, wishing to speak. Ann, I see you there. So if you're ready, you may begin.
Thanks, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks. I won't take a lot of time. I'm here to represent myself, although I am a member of the Transportation Commission. I just wanted to say that I'm very supportive of the Complete and Green Streets as an important initiative. You know, how Madison chooses to design its streets and pedestrian and bicycle paths has such great implications for improved traffic safety and quality of life in Madison. I support the goal for Madison to have a pedestrian and bicycle network that will encourage walking, biking, and transit across the city so you can navigate a good path across the city. And this would be for all ages and abilities. And so we can improve safety for vulnerable users and have this low stress network, again, so we can navigate the city. I did have a comment about the presentation, if I might, just an observation. I was surprised that nobody over the age of 50 was included in your pre-design session. I'm a little prejudiced as I happen to be in that age group, but I think that age group has a lot to share with regard to how you can engage people. It's an important age group in our city, and I just think you ought to think about that. And are there some ways that you might engage differently with people, especially older people? And also, the Transportation Commission is an implementation body, not a policy-making body. But as an implementation body, it uses and obviously implements the policies that are approved. So members of the Transportation Commission have a lot of great feedback to share about this topic, I think, because we will be using Complete and Green Street policies when they're finalized, and we think and talk about it a lot as we look at road geometry today. So that's all I have, Tom. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ann. Are there any questions for the registrant? Of course, remember that if you come up with questions for any registrant, you can ask at any time, as long as we're still on that item. All right. Questions for Adam or Annette? Questions or feedback, I could say. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. No questions, but some feedback, and thank you both for the presentation and for the work that you've been doing. I guess one comment on the sort of resident engagement side of things. I think just something to really keep in mind is around thinking about a diversity of kind of transportation system users. So, we have, I think we're at like 55% mode share for people sort of driving alone to work. And then, different levels for people taking the bus and walking and biking. That's just for sort of commuting, which isn't the best measure in terms of moms and kids and everything else. But I think it would just be really important as we're collecting feedback. I think that'll be a really critical piece to understand is what are people's current experiences. And so people that kind of rely on driving versus rely on taking the bus versus rely on biking will have, probably quite different experiences with the current system and, what they would prioritize into the future. So just, I think something to be really upfront and intentional about and make sure, even as part of that engagement exercise, that the people that we're getting feedback from, that they're also understanding that, right? That whatever their sort of experience is based on whatever their primary mode of transportation is, understanding that that those differences exist and those differences can be pretty significant. In terms of the question, Adam, that you asked about sort of the goal, for me, I guess I take my cues in our kind of existing, albeit very simple, complete streets policy, which is all streets, all people of all ages and abilities, all modes. I feel really strongly that needs to be our goal. We're always going to find reasons why that's going to be very challenging. And we may, from an implementation perspective, we may as a community decide that we can't meet that goal on a given project. I think about University Avenue and, what was all at stake there. And, the Transportation Commission and the city ultimately chose to not be able to achieve that goal on that project. But that should be the exception in my mind. And it doesn't mean that was the wrong decision, right? The trade-off is the impact of actually achieving that goal on that project could have really, really strong consequences for people that are relying on cars, right? Travel times would be very significantly impacted. So, but I think it's really critical that we keep the expectation and the goal that people should be able to walk, bike, ride the bus, or drive or ride in a car safely and comfortably on all the streets. And it really should be an exception where that's not happening. I think the only other thing I would say on that is, two other things. One is this concept of primary and secondary bikeways. I'm not a huge fan of it, like as a starting point, because I think it would be better if we just thought of it more like walking, right? Like I think the expectation is you should be able to walk out your front door and walk as far as your feet can carry you. And there shouldn't be like a designated walking route where you can as long as you can get to this primary walking route, then you'll be okay. But otherwise it's kind of dicey, that like, we don't really think in those terms. And I think we definitely have to think that same way for biking. Biking is not like transit ways where there actually are, just very specific routes and we just have to focus there. So I think biking, walking are like driving. People need to get from point A to point B. So again, baseline, everything should be comfortable for all folks. I think that's all the comments I had. Thanks again for all the work on it. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I mostly second what Alder Foster just said. I did want to throw in a maybe more pragmatic way of thinking about the question of where to put what kinds of facilities, especially in the near term, which is to prioritize where there are gaps, I think, and where putting improvements on existing facilities can fill those gaps and really get you the most bang for the buck. And that can be kind of tricky to do other than sort of know it when you see it. But I think there are ways of moving towards an accessibility framework in thinking about these things. So, where there is a connectivity problem or accessibility problem, that complete streets is the solution and really addresses a major problem. I mean, we're already starting to see this accessibility view show up in the network redesign study. I've been advocating it for a while, so I'd like to throw it in every time it comes up, that if we can move towards sort of this formal accessibility analysis sort of lens, I think that will sort of answer a lot of our questions about what to do, where to do what, and when to get the most impact.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any additional questions or feedback for either Annette or Adam? All right, seeing none, thank you both for being here. We appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you soon and throughout the rest of the year with your as you progress. Okay. We will then move on to our next item, Legistar 65132. 20 is plenty, a Vision Zero initiative to lower residential speed limits to 20 miles per hour.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Can everyone see that all right? Looks like it. All right. My name is Jeremy Nash. I'm with Traffic Engineering. I'm an engineer. I'm here to talk to you today about 20 is plenty. Let's like to start off with what is 20 is plenty. The general concept behind 20 is plenty is that 20 miles per hour is an adequate speed limit for residential areas and local streets. I'm sure everyone has seen a diagram similar to this, but at 20 miles per hour, if there was a pedestrian versus pedestrian crash, vehicle versus pedestrian crash, sorry, there'd be a 13% likelihood of fatality or severe injury. This increases to 40% at 30 miles per hour and 73% at 40 miles per hour. So this is a kind of a clear indication that speed plays a major role in the severity of crashes in neighborhoods and explains the danger of that. And to touch on the danger of speeding real quick, if you're going at farther or faster rate of speed, it increases stopping distance. This is a two-factor approach, two-factor reason. The first being that if I'm driving a vehicle and a ball were to roll into the road, if I'm traveling at a faster rate of speed, it would take a longer amount of time before I was able to react and step on the brake and begin to slow down. And it also increases the amount of distance it takes me to come to a complete stop. So speeding is a danger, and also greater potential for loss of control and steering, especially in Wisconsin with our winters. They get a little dicey. Also, there's a higher degree of crash severity and a decreased field of vision, as can be seen below in the diagram. So now we've touched on the dangers of speeding. I want to go for the need of 20 is plenty. In 2020, the city of Madison received 116 requests for traffic calming, and that's up from the amount we normally get each year. But with COVID and people working from home or working remotely and spending more time around where they live and their residence, they're witnessing more of the traffic issues happening around their residence. And pedestrian versus vehicle crashes are up by 46% from 2009 to 2018. That's across the country, and that's a trend we do not want to see continue here in Madison. And 20 is plenty of something we could do to help combat that. So some experience of other cities. Other cities have taken either a 20 is plenty program or something similar. They have adopted that. New York City lowered the default speed limit from 30 to 25 miles per hour across the city, and that was 2014. Seattle, who we met with last week, lowered their default speed limit from 25 to 20 miles per hour in residential areas. And here's some data that they had that I thought was particularly interesting. So they looked at the locations prior to lowering the speed limit and then after lowering the speed limit. So as you can see, all crashes went down by 22% and injury crashes went down by 18%. If you take a look at the speeds, 50th and 85th percentile, speeds both went down. But you see the biggest change was the 40 plus miles per hour speeders, and that went down by 54%. And as I mentioned with the dangers of speeding, those are the more severe crashes and those that had the biggest change. Cambridge, Massachusetts also lowered the default speed limit from 30 to 25 miles per hour and then to 20 miles per hour specifically in residential areas. Portland, Oregon lowered the default speed limit from 25 to 20 miles per hour in residential areas, and that was in 2018. And Minneapolis, a fellow Midwest city, lowered the default speed limit from 25 to 20 miles per hour, and that was just last year. So how does this connect to Vision Zero? This is a blurb I got from the Vision Zero website. I want to focus on the second half of that. The improve pedestrian and bike safety for all users throughout the city and improve the identified high injury intersections, all in an effort to prevent avoidable crashes. So as I mentioned, if we can bring down the speeds within residential areas, this kind of clearly ties into Vision Zero on the safety aspect of it. And below, that was a quick little bit I got from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation website, just kind of signaling that the city does have the power to lower speed limits. So what's a timeline for 20 is Plenty? Right now, it's winter, spring 2021. We're in the planning phase, reaching out to other cities and doing research, getting as much information as we can. And summer of 2021 this year will be the implementation of phase 1. And I'll touch more on phase 1 and phase 2 right after this. Fall and winter of 2021 will be to evaluate phase 1, what worked, what didn't, what was successful. And then spring of 2022 will begin phase 2. So quick committee meeting schedule. Obviously, I'm here tonight for the TPPB. I'll be going to the Board of Public Works on this upcoming Wednesday, as well as just information, get as much feedback as we can. Then we'll be going to the Transportation Commission April 28th, as well as May 12th. And below you can see a picture from Boston. I thought that was an interesting kind of, you turned off a major arterial street into a more neighborhood residential area. You can kind of clearly see as different speed limits that bracket this road, have kind of a yellow sign to catch your attention as you're driving through. So that was kind of one approach that they had taken that I thought was interesting. So getting back to the phase 1. So for 2021 will be phase 1. We're looking at 2 locations within the city. And we're targeting June of this year to swap out the signs and begin phase 1. And one thing that I think would be really good to do is get as much data as we can. I like to have as much data as possible, both speeding and volume. So do as many studies in kind of the whole area as we can. Collect as much data as we possibly can before implementing the change. And then implement phase 1 and then do studies periodically throughout time. And another key component is neighborhood and alder support. It's definitely something we want support from the neighborhood and from the alder of that area in order for it to be as successful as it can be. And then phase 2 would be beginning spring of 2022. And that'll be further implementation across the city. I think we really want to look at phase 1 and kind of look at what worked, what didn't, and try to kind of nail down phase 1 before moving on to phase 2 and looking at a broader scope of phase 2. So criteria, here's what we're looking at in order to select locations for phase 1. So our 2 locations that we're selecting this year in 2021. The first is equity. So we'll be selecting 2 different locations across the city. One location probably closer to the isthmus where we see a greater mix of pedestrians and bicyclists and vehicles using the same area, as well as an NRT area, neighborhood resource team area. And so hopefully capture a lot of different street designs and just kind of get some different experiences across the city. We're also looking at the number of crashes and the speeds in those areas. A logical geographic area, that's probably been the biggest driving factor so far in looking at our locations for phase 1. And that's kind of, as you would enter off of a major road into an area, it's something you would feel, okay, this is an area, this is a kind of intuitive little pocket that, okay, I'm turning off this major road into this area. And you would feel that it is, lower speed limit. You could go one way and hit a lake or hit a park or something. But it's kind of an area that people will drive into and kind of get a feel for, okay, this neighborhood does have a lower speed limit. A variety of street designs, that's also been an important component. We want to cast as wide a net as we can and get as much experience as we can with phase 1. So looking at, really wide streets, really narrow streets, one-sided parking, two-sided parking. Is there sidewalk? Is there no sidewalk? Is there the bike boulevard? But just kind of capturing in as many different design elements as we can for as many different streets as we can. And kind of take a look at what worked and what didn't and under what conditions. Also total area, making sure our 2 phase 1 areas for this year are about the same. The number of parcels, the land use, commercial, residential, mixed, presence of construction projects in 2021. And I put that in there just because when we construct roads within a local residential area, we typically close it to through traffic. And that disrupts the normal flow of traffic. Traffic that normally go on the streets under construction would be displaced to another street. And so that kind of disrupts the normal flow of traffic. So we want somewhere that does not have any construction projects this year. Percent of blocks without sidewalk, the percent of blocks with bike routes and bike boulevards, percent of blocks in the interim high injury network, the presence of schools, libraries, parks, or other generators of pedestrian or bicyclist activity, like a public pool maybe. And once again, neighborhood and older support. That's a really important component to 20 is Plenty. So here's our potential phase 1 locations for this year. As you can see, the red locations are the ones closer to the isthmus that we see a mix of activity, and the locations surrounded in blue are either partially or totally encapsulating one or multiple NRT areas. So those typically, we see those a little bit further out. But these are kind of the base of the criteria that we're looking at. These are our kind of locations that we want to kind of whittle down to one red location and one blue location for phase 1 for 2021. So evaluating phase 1, I believe I touched on, we want to conduct speed studies to compare data before and after, the change of speed limit. This is something I found from Portland's 20 is Plenty program that I thought was interesting. You can see this is looking at the 85th percentile speed, but the vast majority of the locations they looked at, the speed went down. A handful of locations, the speed remained the same after they changed the speed limit, and a handful of locations, the speed actually went up, which is unintended consequence. But I think it really helps to have that data to go off of and to look at that before and after to kind of evaluate phase 1. I think it's also important to survey the residents to get their feedback. They're the ones that are living there and seeing what happens day in, day out. And they might have different experiences or observations than I do, than we do. So I think it'd be really good to get their thoughts as well. And as I touched on, what worked and what didn't, looking at as many different street design characteristics as we can in order to kind of cast as broad a net as we can and get as much experience as we can. And the bottom left, there's an interesting picture with Seattle. As you enter, the city limits, you can see arterial speed limits are 25 and non-arterial speed limits are 20 unless otherwise posted. But that was just one approach that that worked for the city of Seattle to kind of communicate to drivers as you're entering the city. Here are our default speed limits. And finally, public outreach. I think it's really important to work with the neighborhoods and make sure, A, they understand what 20 is Plenty is, and then B, also to get their support for it and want to make sure that they want it to succeed. Also doing mailings to neighborhoods and to neighborhood to, again, kind of get feedback or send out surveys, public meetings, and as well as yard signs. That's a component, it's a strategy that other cities have implemented that has been very effective. As you can see, on the right is Minneapolis's. And it's something as you're driving down the road, you'd be able to get the meaning of it. You drive past it, you could see it communicates pretty clearly the meaning of the sign. But let's say you haven't seen one of those before. Maybe you're out walking your dog and there's more information. There's the website for more information. And so I thought that was an interesting and effective technique that other cities have implemented. And with that, I'll open up to questions.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I'm really glad that this is here. It's actually one of the additional recommendations in the currently draft report from the traffic calming subcommittee. So you're going to be a little bit ahead of us. So that's great. So we do have some registrants for public comment and some written comments that were submitted somewhat late. So we'll start with the registrants that are on the call. And then I will read the written statements that came in kind of late. The first registrant is Ann Kovich, 2605 Golden Gateway, Madison, in support, wishing to speak. Ann, I see you're still with us. You may begin when you're ready.
Thanks. You can hear me okay, Tom?
Yes, you can.
Great, thanks. I just want to say that I strongly support reducing the default speed limit from 25 to 20 on our residential streets in Madison. Speeding on our residential streets is clearly a safety issue, as was discussed in the presentation. For some reason, most folks seem to think 5 miles over the speed limit, the posted limit, is acceptable. So maybe reducing the posted speed to 20 might actually reduce their speeds to 25, hopefully lower. I live just off Moreland Road, which is a very, very busy street and quite difficult for pedestrians to cross. So I'm, hopeful that reducing the speed limit will help in that regard. And at the Transportation Commission, we do hear many complaints about speeding on our residential streets. So, this is just one of the ways that we can certainly help to reduce that and improve traffic safety. Thanks.
Thank you, Ann. Are there any questions for Ann? Seeing none. All right, our next registrant is Bob Schaefer, 6 Cottonwood Circle, Madison, Wisconsin. Neither support nor opposing, wishing to speak. Bob, you may go ahead when you're ready. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. One of the things that I don't think is taken into consideration is the design speed of the road. I know that, at soon to be 81 years old and with over 1 million miles of driving experience under my belt, that design speed of the roads are a very significant factor. One of the reasons that the interstate system is traveling at 80 miles an hour in many cases is because that's what the design speed on the road was. When drivers are driving below the design speed on the road, that it's more easy to be distracted. Distraction is really what causes a lot of the accidents that occur. When drivers are doing 35, 40 miles an hour down a 25 mile an hour street or 30 mile an hour street, that is not going to change just by changing the sign because they're not paying attention to the sign right now. So that I think that doing something to control the speeding is important. And I know that we were using speed boards and things like that on North Thompson, but that I think that, again, looking at the design speed is going to be more of a factor. And because otherwise people are going to become distracted watching other people doing things, and that because their focus doesn't need to be on there as much when they're traveling 20 miles an hour. So I think that there's a lot of thought that needs to be given to this, that I think that one of the things that we have to keep into consideration is that when streets are built, that they are built primarily for vehicle travel. You don't have the same thickness of the surface on sidewalks as you do on the street. So that we need to look at it from all aspects, that bicycle safety, pedestrian safety, I agree, are all important aspects of it, but that I've been in situations where that on one occasion I was making a left turn off of East Washington onto southbound 51, and on the turn signal, and I was already in the process of a turn when a bicyclist ran the red light over on coming on northbound on East Washington, and I had to do everything I could to stop without hitting him. So we have to do something with the rules applying to everybody. And that I noticed that one of the things when I was out in New York, that the way that they operate their traffic signals is that on some of the streets, all traffic stops at one time. And then when it starts back up again, then the traffic is allowed to proceed through there and go through a number of the intersections without having to stop.
Mr. Schaefer, your time is up. If you could wrap up quickly.
Okay. Design speed is what's critical.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, our next registrant is Gordon Myers, 791220 Acorn Drive, Verona, in opposition, wishing to speak. Gordon, I can see that you're there. You may begin when you're ready. You have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks, and it's 9712.
Oh, sorry, I might have misread it.
Okay. My name's Gordon Myers. I lived on the west side of Madison, kind of on the outskirts. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I only first heard about this 20 is Plenty initiative this morning through an article in the State Journal, and reading it and reading what I perceived as a one-sided presentation, I felt compelled to voice my strong opposition to it. I can appreciate the desire to eliminate traffic accidents, certainly. I understand lowering the speed limit is being proposed as a way of doing that. So I have to ask, why stop there? Why beat around the bush if let's go all in with the Vision Zero and let's just reduce the limit to 0? Because if cars aren't moving, that will probably eliminate accidents. Obviously, I'm being snarky, but to those of us who own cars and have places to be, this continual lowering of the limits really feels like there's this malevolent committee that just simply doesn't want anyone to drive. The fact is that 20 miles an hour is not plenty. If I take my foot off the brakes without applying any gas whatsoever, I suspect that my idling speed might get up to 20, maybe. It just feels painfully slow. I know there are outliers. I've personally witnessed very reckless drivers barreling through, neighborhoods going faster than 70 miles an hour. I'm not suggesting this is okay, or that we should be the wild, wild west and not have limits. But I would just ask the committee to continue consider whether reducing the limit by 5 miles an hour is actually going to have any effect on those drivers. Now, I do subscribe to a newsletter from the National Motorists Association, and they actually have a lot to say about this topic and Vision Zero initiatives in general. And so I question the honesty, first of all, of the way in which some of the data is presented, like the map with the different colored dots, from Seattle was said that the vast majority of, cases it reduced the speed, but I was counting the dots. And I think it's only in 55% of the cases it reduced speed, which is not the vast majority. It is a majority. But there's one study that was left off that list that I think is worth considering. In Boston, in 2017, reduced their limit by 5 miles an hour, the residential limit citywide. And a study by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, ironically, although they were lobbying for lower limits, the study showed that both the mean speed and the 85th percentile speed did not appreciably change in any regard at all. I am one of those people that Anne mentioned too that will drive 5 miles and over. I feel no shame about that. I don't feel like this continual harping on speed is getting at the core of the issue. Like I said, I got places to be. I don't feel like Madison would be any different from Boston if we lower the speed by 5. Okay. Me and many other drivers are just going to ignore that if that's the honest truth. So anyways, thank you for your time. Thanks for considering my opinion.
Thank you, Gordon. Are there any questions for the registrant? All right, seeing none. We've got a couple of folks that submitted comments. I'll read them briefly, assuming a lot of members probably haven't had a chance to. First one is from Meg Gordon. Hello, I'm writing in strong support of green streets and 20 is plenty effort. I plan to listen to the meeting but cannot comment on specifics as this is the first I have heard about this effort. However, as an automobile driver and frequent pedestrian and cyclist, I am very distressed by the current behavior of many drivers. Most, I am sure, do not realize how their speed affects those who are walking or riding bikes and how speed and careless driving makes walking and riding not only unsafe, but also unpleasant. It discourages everyone from walking to ride or walk due to the noise, carbon pollution, and anxiety generated. And this at a time when it's more important than ever to get people out of their cars and back into community building practices like riding and walking. Driving is impersonal and isolating. I love the fact that cars exist and are amazingly handy too, but they are a valuable resource that is overused and abused. The number who speed, pass on the right in the bus bike lane, refuse to give way to pedestrians is shocking. Just drive around Madison going the posted speed limit and you will see how many drivers simply can't hold back, even if it means accelerating past you toward a red light. They are simply not thinking. I hope you will adjust how to enforce the traffic laws, old and new, and most of all, they need to be enforced uniformly and not as an excuse to profile a segment of our community. Thank you for reading. Next one is from David Dechazer. To whom it may concern, the city has their rapid transit plan that is currently being worked towards. That being said, I vehemently disagree with this proposal. Working in various transportation-related jobs in the past 5 years, this is a hindrance to people working, consuming, and living around the city. More often than not, I see racers up and down East Washington, congregating near the mall, etc., that don't care about your speed limits. People on the Beltline that easily push 75 to 90 miles per hour. Also, the MPD routinely violates the speed when not running emergency lights and sets a terrible example. In a loaded P1000, I came to a complete stop at a red light and then watched 2 MPD cars roll through the light, flipping their light on and off. That I would argue is firmly more hazardous than routine traffic going 5 miles per hour faster. Literally almost had a Fitchburg police officer almost rear-end my work vehicle at top speed in the past month due to being on their computer. I watched them jerk forward and heard the tires screech as they rapidly brake to avoid rear-ending me. There have been multiple high rate of speed crashes over the past years that would not be impacted by this in the slightest. In addition, with the upcoming transit changes, you could see a reduction in traffic on the roads. I believe the city would be better focusing on transit. Rail would be cool and bring us towards some of the better flowing cities nationally and internationally. Options even beyond the current proposals to continue reduction in traffic on the road, clearing the way for the police to use their speed to go after the larger violators. These speed reductions end up costing people time in transit. This in itself is dangerous if the high-level violators still violate, which they will. Product delays, extending workdays for some, and sets up a bunch of low-level violations. Zero is a great goal, but seems unlikely beyond the concept if there isn't a focus on the larger violators that have led to multiple fatal accidents in the past years. Next one here, dear sir or madam, I would like to register for public comment at tonight's Transportation Policy and Planning Board meeting. My name is, that was the attendee we just heard from in person, so I won't read that one again. Okay. So this next one is from Ann Walker from the Marquette neighborhood. Dear board, I am so pleased and hopeful regarding the 20 is Plenty program to lower speed limits on our streets to 20 miles per hour. I would love to see the speed limit for the entire Marquette neighborhood and all neighborhoods drop to 20 or even lower in select areas. I support that change on residential streets as well as secondary arterials like Willie Street. Thanks much. Okay, those are all of our registrants and folks that have wrote in. Tom and Yang, both of your hands are up. Tom, yours was up.
I'm sorry, we did get a late breaking registrant. I just emailed you.
All right, let me check my inbox quick. Okay, not seeing.
I can just, it's Adam Wood.
Oh, Adam.
434 Wood Street.
Okay. Adam, go ahead.
I figured since I was already in here, I might as well take an opportunity to speak on this subject as a resident. I do strongly support the 20 is Plenty approach. And I wanted just to share a few pieces of information about that and why I support it. First off, over the last 10 years, pedestrian fatalities have increased by 46% nationwide. And compared to traffic fatalities for people in cars have only gone up by 5%. So there's been a substantial increase disproportionately in pedestrian fatalities. I also want to point out the research is pretty strong on this, that being hit by a car traveling 20 miles per hour is not nearly as fatal or injurious as being hit by a car traveling at 25 or 30. In fact, your chance of being seriously injured or killed if you're struck by a car traveling at 30 miles per hour is 45%. Car traveling at 20 miles per hour is only 5%. It's a substantial increase in safety. That's presuming that people do travel the speed limit, as was previously pointed out. Overall, there has been research that's shown that 20 mile per hour zones actually reduce the incidence of traffic crashes by 60% and reduce the incidence of crashes involving children by 67%. And so what I want to ask the board and everyone is to consider the balance between people's convenience and people's safety, between someone's convenience to drive and save a few minutes versus someone's right to life. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Are there any questions from any of our registrants on this item? Okay, seeing none. All right, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that this 20 is Plenty is a policy issue, and I've been on vacation, so I haven't been able to email it out. But it is within the board's purview to endorse the pilot, to allow us to kind of explore this. And then if this were to become a citywide initiative, it would be, at the discretion of the board. So I just wanted to clarify that perhaps this might have been labeled as an information, but it's purely a policy issue, and it's within the purview and jurisdiction of the TPPB. And just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you, Tom. And I guess to all board members, to make it clear, it is my intent to ask that the board make a decision on this, whether to support or not, this evening before we're finished. So Thank you, Tom. Yang, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I just want to add the information to Jeremy's presentation in terms of the kind of big picture, the timeline, what we're looking for from here and from BBW and from TC. I think what Tom brought up is perfect for the things that I want to add. To change the residential street speed limit citywide, is a policy issue. And this year we want to do phase 1 project. Next year we intend to do phase 2 project, which is a citywide implementation. So before that, we will have it goes through a legislative process. Change all the speed limits on residential streets without actual signing to it. So there's going to be a legislative process involved. We'll have to change the city ordinance, and absolutely we'll get the board heavily involved in that. But for to get something going faster, we want to run the phase 1 projects this year, preferably a couple of them, because citywide program takes a lot of budgetary support, quite a lot of logistics, and also, as I mentioned, some legislative changes as well. So the plan, for us to be here today is that we'd really like to, get a kind of a higher level guidance and input from the board today, and assuming the board is supportive of it. We will also like to hear, some of the, guidance on, for this year's phase 1 projects, which areas should we focus on? Because right now we have quite a few different choices. We need help narrow them down to 2 locations. And we'll do the same thing at BPW Wednesday, and on the 28th we'll be at the Transportation Commission. For a more detailed discussion, assuming this board is supportive of the idea, we will probably try to narrow down more on specifics. That's a location for the pilot for the phase 1 projects this year. Jeremy put also on one of his slides. He also put down May 15th at a TC as well. So that's just in case that on the 28th meeting. If we cannot narrow down the two locations, we'll bring it back to the May 12th TC meeting. So that's kind of gives the board maybe a little bit big picture on the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang. All right, so we've got our presentation. We've heard from registrants and staff. Are there any questions for staff? Alder Foster, go ahead. And we can combine feedback into this as well, questions and feedback. So Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. Jeremy, could you speak to, a number of registrants kind of raised this question, this concern of, well, changing the sign isn't going to do anything. So I guess one, what do we know about that question? So if we do nothing else other than change the signs, what do we expect? I think you showed some evidence of kind of what that looks like. But then secondarily, is there anything else that we're planning or thinking about doing in addition to those sign changes in these areas that we think would help reinforce that change?
Yeah, definitely. So to your first question, would changing the speed limit or changing the signs really make an impact? That was one thing that was interesting. We talked to the city of Seattle last week, and that was something that they had said was changing the signs, but then also increasing the sign frequency. So that I think they said they were up to every quarter mile they had speed limit signs. So that was one thing. You're changing the signs, but then also installing additional speed limit signs was a technique that they had found to be effective. And then to your second question, right now the idea is changing the traffic signs and then also providing street kind of yard signs for residents as well as kind of additional signage to as you kind of enter into a neighborhood that is 20 is plenty. Something it would be very clear that as you go into that neighborhood, that is a 20 is plenty neighborhood. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. So maybe in terms of feedback, and maybe this is, if you're going to be doing 2 pilots, maybe we even look and sort of do one kind of as you proposed. And then I wonder if it wouldn't be possible to consider in one of the pilot areas doing something else additional, like some sort of temporary kind of choker setup, like essentially, barrels or something else to sort of make some constrictions in the streets, particularly at kind of some of the entry points into this 20-mile-an-hour zone. So, almost thinking about like when we are doing road construction and we've got, the gates up and, obviously the intent there is to sort of reinforce that the road's under construction, but something similar where we're really physically narrowing the street in at some key points, maybe combined with signage. That might be an interesting then to see the difference, what kind of reductions we saw when we kind of, just change the signs. And, if we do implement some of these sort of road narrowing, traffic calming kind of temporary devices to see if that gets us a stronger reduction, might be worth considering. In terms of your question about neighborhood selection, I think just like a couple thoughts. One is I remember when we did the kind of street closures last year and had some kind of false starts, I think in a couple of the neighborhoods where there wasn't maybe much of a demand for it, and we ended up pulling those back out. Just really thinking about the conversation we had related to the Complete Streets outreach and wondering if there isn't an opportunity to combine some of that. Because obviously these topics, as we said before, are just so linked. So I would just really want to make sure we don't do this in a neighborhood that isn't really wanting it. I know there are plenty of neighborhoods that really do want it. And if it's just a question of not having, that we need to invest the time in communicating why this might be of value and why people might want it, I think we should do that work. And again, maybe we could even combine it in some of the kind of educational part around Complete Streets and connect with some of those communities. The other thing to maybe consider in selecting an area is speeds on the adjacent streets. So I think it'll probably, I drive a couple times a year, and when I do, it's really striking to me. Like if you're driving on the Beltline, and then when you turn off and get onto sort of city streets, they feel really slow, and you feel like you can go really fast. So I'm sure drivers are used to that. I think it would be more effective if we found neighborhoods that are maybe adjacent to other 25-mile-an-hour zones rather than 30 or 35-mile-an-hour streets, just so that's less of a decrease for people turning off of them. And then the last thing I think I wanted to share was just actually maybe answering Adam's question from the previous presentation about, if we want to strive for complete streets on every street, what are we willing to give up? And he actually maybe answered that question for himself in his comment on this one, which is sacrificing motor vehicle speed. So I think this is definitely, from a policy perspective, I think we should be willing to trade that off for increased safety. So I think this is exactly doing that, and I'm a strong supporter for it, and really just encourage us to kind of push as boldly as we can and add additional measures to really try and get those speed reductions as we change the signs. So thanks everybody for your work on it.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I had some thoughts sort of similar to Alder Foster. First, sort of responding to, I think, some questions that came up from some of the registrants. One being this idea of, do you need to change some design features in combination with these? Just sort of want to make sure that as we move forward with this, have you made clear what the justification is for making these changes? I think there'll be questions that come up about, can you do this without those design changes? Is it aligned with existing standards, whether they're state standards or MUTCD or whatever, just so that you're thinking about those questions in advance a little bit. I'm sure you probably are already. That was one point. And then also to the point of the effectiveness of these programs that we've seen in other places, since I think this is another question that might come up. One of the registrants mentioned the IIHS study of Boston, which my recollection was that it did show impacts. So I think it might be helpful to just sort of run through some of these past studies and just have a clear understanding of what the evidence has shown so far. And then in the similar spirit of studies, when we start to look at these pilot projects and look at what effect they're having, it will be great if we can see an immediate impact sort of street by street from these changes. But I'm also kind of expecting that if we take this citywide, the effect would be much more pronounced just psychologically, that, entire areas of the city, the default is 20 rather than folks just knowing that when they're in a certain neighborhood or a certain road, there's the special case that they should be adhering to. So maybe just kind of keeping that in mind as we think about studying the impacts and communicating them over the long run. But otherwise, yeah, I'm happy to see this moving forward. So thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Yang, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I just want to add that kind of to Alder Foster's question. If we just do the speed limit sign change, whether that's going to have any effect. I believe Seattle also did some experiment on that, and the answer is yes. There are some effects. So simply just by changing our speed limit signs, they did see some speed reduction. Of course, it will be better if other things can be done along with it, like the suggestions from Alder Foster. I think those are really good. And we happen to be working on another program, which is kind of a extension or adaptation of the Shared Streets program. Now we kind of call it the Slow Streets program. And we actually want to look at how can we maybe do some permanent change to the streets by doing some temporary measures, kind of for testing. So maybe we can work two programs can work together to see we can set up some examples. Another thing I want to say maybe another thing I want to comment on is the road design, the design speed. That's a really good point. Again, I think it's a perfectly perfect word will be change all the streets so that we design it at 20 miles per hour. But we understand that's not realistic for now. We got to work with what we have for now, and maybe in the future, we definitely maybe think differently about it. But we do believe this is a good step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang. Alder Heck, go ahead and welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Just a couple of thoughts. First of all, if as staff and TC or whoever is going to make the decisions about trial locations, if you're looking for a neighborhood that would likely have a lot of buy-in and a cooperative and supportive Alder, I would put a plug in for the Mendota side of the Isthmus in District 2. But also, I guess I would advocate for a fairly robust messaging campaign, even for the pilot program. I think to East Washington and lowering the speed limit on East Washington. And my impression is that almost no one in the city understands that that was done from a Vision Zero framework. They think that it was to address the racing on East Washington. And, maybe that's a side effect, but it's tough for people, I think, to really understand what Vision Zero is. And so this implementation of 20 is plenty, or it is I think needs a lot of messaging. And then just one other quick point. You know what will go up when this pilot program or a citywide program is put in place is complaints. I mean, I already get so many constituent contacts about speeding and rude driving, and these people that will know the speed limit is 20, and I can imagine a doubling of complaints to the city and alders. So just something to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add on to Alder Heck's points, since I live in that district and follow the neighborhood discussions by various means, and clearly delineating the boundaries of the project and communicating 10 times more than you think it needs to be communicated, I think will be very important. I think one of the issues you'll have is if it's a neighborhood like Tenny Lapham that, you know, is bounded by streets that have very heavy traffic, one of the leading complaints we're already getting is that slower speed limits will move traffic around. So the folks who have the perception that the traffic is going to move to their street and their street will become less safe because we're trying to make neighbor's street more safe, that too has to be expressed. So, and I also do get the impression that some people think that the slogan means that we're trying to reduce auto traffic to zero, not that we're trying to reduce, you know, injuries to zero. And so communicating clearly what the point of this program is, that it's not necessary, I would not take it from a traffic reduction point of view, but obviously it's a safety program. I think you'll get more buy-in and more understanding.
Thank you, Margaret. I also want to mention that Deputy Mayor Crawley and Alder Harrington McKinney have joined us, so welcome to them as well. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Just wanted to follow up on something that Ying said, and so I'm really happy to hear that there's kind of thinking about, how could this together with the Slow Streets initiative, which I'm anxious to see get rolled out again. And maybe that's the answer to that question I raised of, could we kind of have two different models? So maybe we move forward with kind of two locations in this program that are selected to sort of just do the speed limit sign reductions. And then I don't see any reason why we shouldn't also consider lowering the speed limits on the Slow Street locations as well. And so maybe that would serve as that kind of test case where we have two locations here where we're lowering the speed limit to 20, and then we have, two or more of the Slow Street candidates that we're going to be doing, some additional things and change the signage to 20. That might really answer the question. And I mean, I think if we're clearly with the name of the program itself, Slow Streets would lend itself to wanting to reduce the maximum anyway. So if that's feasible, maybe we could kind of add that in and have sort of two related pilots happening at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Randy, go ahead.
I think my question is directed at staff, but in support of what's been presented, I'm just curious as to, is there an enforcement component to this project? Or is it strictly the statement and we assume all speeders will comply? I mean, they haven't complied with 25. Will they comply to the 20? I mean, there must be some type of enforcement component.
I can speak to that. So our goal would be to get neighborhoods to want to buy into this. So to get them voluntarily to participate. would be our ultimate objective of this, without having to set up speed traps or anything along those lines.
Right. I don't mean to set up speed traps, but let's just take Monroe Street, and I travel through, and I'd like to think that I'm driving the speed limit or less, but I certainly see people passing. So when you say the neighborhood, I'm not sure what that means. I mean, you get their buy-in that let's lower the speed limit, but we're going on the premise that those that are speeding will also buy into this. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
I see Tom Lynch's hand up too. Tom, feel free to respond.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. A lot of our enforcement is focused more on our collectors and arterials, so that there probably wouldn't be a lot of enforcement on our neighborhood streets. However, with some changes, we have found that we've been able to find speeds go down. An example would be on North Packer Street, where we took a wide open street and put in some buffered bike lanes, and we were able to, just through that one action, we did some before and after speed studies, and the average speed went down 4.3 miles per hour. And so we're hoping that, through increased signage and perhaps some threshold treatments and the like, we could kind of get into this set of changes. Because I think while we would like more enforcement, I think we acknowledge that more enforcement probably is not likely, and it may not even be desired. So.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Randy. Additional questions or feedback? So on this issue of street geometry and design speed, this is something that I believe that this board needs to or will need to deal with at some point. It's certainly come up in the traffic calming subcommittee's proceedings, and I'm hoping it's included as part of our Vision Zero, or I'm sorry, Vision Zero, but Complete Streets Initiative. But it's something that we definitely need to keep track of and make sure that we don't let fall by the wayside. Because this may be successful, but if we let it go in a vacuum, it may not be as successful as it could be if we take multiple approaches. So one last chance for comments or feedback. I would be searching for a motion, perhaps to support the 20 is Plenty initiative and direct staff to move forward with implementation with a robust messaging campaign. I've also heard some discussion about maybe doing two different pilots. If there's folks that would be interested in maybe adding that to the motion, that's fine. Or if they have a different motion, we go ahead. So I see a few hands up. Alder Kemble, go ahead.
I'll make that motion to support staff to move forward with the 20 is 20 pilot with a robust messaging campaign.
Thank you, Alder Kemble. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Randy. Discussion. Alder Kemble, would you like to speak to your motion?
Sure. Just to say that apropos of some of the comments tonight, the point of doing this is not to make sure there are no speeders ever. The point of this is to improve overall safety of our streets and to reduce the speed of most people traveling on these streets, because accidents don't always happen just by speeders. Sometimes they happen just by people going the speed limit. And what we've heard is when we reduce the speed limit, those accidents are less serious when they're with pedestrians and bicyclists. So I'm all for it, and best of luck with the pilots.
Thank you, Alder Kemble. Alder Foster, I saw your hand up earlier. If you good to go, okay. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of supporting the 20 is Plenty initiative and directing staff to move forward with implementation with the robust messaging campaign, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. The chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that is unanimous. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is Legistar 65055, Parking Subcommittee membership. So the Parking Subcommittee, I think, is now down to 2 of the original 4 members. I think Chris McCahill and Alder Foster remain. So I guess we'd be looking for volunteers to either join that group. Otherwise, with 2 folks, they don't have to worry about negative quorum issues. They can continue to work on it without being an official subcommittee. But I see Chris's hand up. He can probably explain the situation better than I, so go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I can just speak a little bit to remind folks, and I don't know if Alder Foster wants to add anything, but essentially a handful of the TPV agreed to split off and sort of work on some of these on-street parking policy related questions. And there were enough of us that it created a quorum issue. So those meetings have been posted and it's been sort of a formal subcommittee ad necessity. So now that we're down to two folks still engaged in that, the need for a formal subcommittee doesn't really seem to exist. So either that work could continue on the side, or TPVB could decide to sort of, I guess, reinstitute that subcommittee with other members. And I guess just another thing I'll add is there's sort of 2 things driving the work. One is sort of an overarching need to redefine the city's on-street parking policy, which is currently focused just on addressing commuter parking issues. And that doesn't seem to be broad enough to address the needs of on-street parking. The second need driving this is that there's the TDM ordinance is coming into play soon. I think that will start making its way through bodies. And that's going to constrain what I think developers are providing off-street parking. And so there's a need to make sure that on-street parking, the on-street parking policy is enough to address any concerns that the TDM policy will push parking issues onto the street. So that's the general overview from my perspective.
Thank you, Chris. Thoughts from the body on how they would like the parking subcommittee to proceed? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess at this point, my recommendation would be to disband it. I mean, barring great interest from other folks. If there is interest, we can keep rolling with new appointees, or if there's interest in the future, we could sort of reconstitute it. We've been, Eric left because of his move, and Alder Campbell won't be participating with us anymore, and so we're actually at a point we've sort of done with that, with the 4 of us as well as staff. I think laid out a pretty clear framework that we can bring here and give an update to. But we really had just transitioned into wanting to kind of take that framework and apply it against some real life neighborhoods to see what that would actually look like and to understand some of those impacts. So actually Alder Heck, who's not a member of this body, has been joining us, and we've been sort of looking particularly at the Tenny Lapham neighborhood, since that's a good example where we have sort of real life on-street parking pressure. So as Chris said, I think, if we disband it, the sort of he and I and Alder Heck and, can kind of continue to work on that with staff. It would not be great if we sort of just sat in this limbo zone because no work can continue due to issues of negative quorum, et cetera. So I guess my recommendation at this point would be to disband it, and we can commit to bringing an update of kind of where things are at and sharing it with the board at a future meeting.
Thank you, Alder Foster, and thank you, Chris, for your update and feedback there. Unless there are, I guess, volunteers to join the subcommittee, I'd be looking for a motion to disband the current parking subcommittee, but directing, or I guess giving our blessing to Alder Foster and Chris to continue working with Alder Heck and staff to bring something to us that we can review and hopefully approve or discuss and approve. Alder Kimball, go ahead.
Move to disband the parking subcommittee.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Margaret. Any discussion or further discussion? Seeing none, all of those in favor of disbanding the parking subcommittee, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that's unanimous. Before we leave for the evening, this will be Alder Kimball's last meeting with us as a board member. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank her. She's been with us or since our inception for just about 3 years now. She was really with us before we were here, being instrumental in the creation of the city's Department of Transportation, the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, the Transportation Commission, through her service on the Transportation Ordinance Review Ad Hoc Committee. There are varying degrees to which we all engage with the boards and committees that we serve on. But Rebecca Kimball takes her role very seriously, always comes prepared, isn't afraid to ask the hard questions and hold the board accountable for us to meet our responsibilities. And I've really appreciated that. Alder Kimball has spent a lot of effort helping the board grow itself through feedback, participating in leadership meetings, and really, I think, setting us on a course to do the best work that we can. I really feel that Alder Kimball has been a powerful voice for positive change, and I hope that she will join us in future meetings going forward to share your ideas and to keep us on the right track. So thank you, Alder Kimball, so much for your service. Right. And then I guess while we're on the topic, I would also like to extend the welcome to Alder Harrington McKinney, who will be joining us officially as a board member starting at our next meeting. So unless there are any further comments for the evening, I would look for motions to adjourn. Alder Kimball, go ahead.
Move adjournment.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Margaret. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting for this evening, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. That's unanimous. We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.